Sure, can say that we fear death, can't ever truly accept it, can't even imagine it. That's how weak we are. The show Beef is about these two people who get into a road rage incident. Danny is suicidal. Amy is rich, upper middle class. They're both shitheads. Anyway, a lot of shit happens, alright? A few pranks here, a few crimes there. Danny frames Amy for arson. Danny accidentally kidnaps her child. Then his brother Isaac decides to hold the child for ransom, a shootout with the police, and eventually Danny and Amy run each other off the road after the shootout, and finally, there they are, threatening each other, dying from their injuries, dehydration, and food poisoning. And that's what it took for them to finally just talk to each other. Ever since that road rage incident, now on the brink of death, there were sparse moments of connection throughout the show, of course, a few moments where things were going well, but ultimately the show is about assholes and pieces of shit that are just mad at the world, that can't empathize with others because they can't empathize with themselves. But the final episode where they actually talk to each other about their lives and connect with each other, understanding that they aren't alone, that the other is human just like them, and knowing that that connection is permanent because there aren't any secrets that they hid that could ruin everything, knowing that at last connection isn't sparse anymore, that it would not be severed in some future episode where they reveal the horrible shit that they've done. And that feeling that there is so much more to life, but it's too late. They're dying in some random forest. There's so much more to be resolved. The audience is angry at both for doing such horrendous acts, of course, and yet death comes for us all. An unfulfilled life will remain unfulfilled. Death always feels too abrupt of an end. You know, Big Joe videos always end abruptly. God, I gotta stop mentioning Big Joe, man, Jesus. Always leaving the audience wondering. Death doesn't leave you time to wonder. If you haven't wondered enough during life, if you didn't recognize death during life, if you only realize that you haven't lived after you have died, too bad. You can't wonder anymore. The world is gone and you're dead in a forest. If only you weren't so alone your whole life. If only you talked. If only this and that. Maybe, just maybe a fulfilling life would have been possible. If we weren't so alienated from ourselves. Do I write my review of the show because of my fear of death? Because I fear that the show ended? That I might not live a fulfilling life? I think Edward Hopper tried to depict the death in life, the muffled silence of life. He tried to depict alienation. Do the characters in his paintings really live? Are those things alive? Oddly enough, I think they're probably the most lifelike out of any paintings that depict a human being. The characters, they exist. They simply exist. Once we acknowledge their lack of animated life, we are left with nothing but their existence. They aren't trying to imitate life. They are existence in of themselves. They have a singular statement, and that is, I have been, and I will be. Their surrealism only amplifies their realness. The paintings are depicting an aspect of life, the constant death of our souls, the constant death of our personalities under capitalist society. That feeling of cold warmth, that feeling of human connection being so unattainable, something so out of reach that it becomes a mere spectacle to gaze at as we are gazing at the painting now. The painting describes the audience as we're viewing it. We're looking at a mirror, and art stares back. We're looking at our death. A life unfulfilled will remain in this purgatory of endless cold warmth. Every day is just another day. Every day is a sunny, happy day filled with happy loneliness. And in this world, you try to convince yourself that you've lived, until you realize far too late when you are in a forest, dying. Out of the mundane, you are on the brink of death, and finally see what your life amounted to. Dementia can be used to describe Hopper's painting's constant death while living. Constantly losing yourself every few minutes, an automaton that can't remember, simply existing, the closest imitation of death, constant rebirth, a mockery of your past self, now a husk. Dementia is a being that cannot die but cannot live either, nor are they on the edge of life and death. It's something entirely different, a new state, a state of pure existence and nothing else. Hopper's paintings are not life, nor are they death. They are raw, unfiltered existence, a rawness that a majority of people cannot bring themselves to admit, a brutal mirror stained with the audience's blood, a brutal look into the here and now. Dementia is the constant here and now, an eternal Hopper painting where time ceased to exist. Are you here now, or did you forget that you ever had dementia? How long were you here? Were you here then? Are you here now? Will you be here now? Then and where? And yet, there is someone close to you, watching over you as you deteriorate into a living Hopper painting. And yet, there is someone next to you as you lay dying in some random forest. You don't know if your brother Paul is alive. You should have talked to him more. You shouldn't have sabotaged his college ambitions just so that he doesn't go away from you, so that you wouldn't be alone. You should have lived life. How many experiences have you missed out on? Too bad. Now you lay in some random forest waiting for death. So, do we fear death? I don't think so. We also don't hate it, nor do we accept it. I think we simply have a passion for it. We say that we fear death, but if we really did, we wouldn't be even writing about it. We have a passion for death just as we have a passion for life, because without death, life is of course no longer life anymore. Death fascinates us, it's an amazing concept. I don't think you should fear something that you think is fascinating, like truly fear it. Let me ask you this, does the perfect artwork exist? You make art to make the perfect art piece? No, we are artists because of our love of art, our love of life. The only way to live with death is to love it. We don't live in spite of the absurd, we live because of the absurd. If there wasn't the absurd, why would you be pushing up that boulder? You wouldn't even exist in the first place to think about death. In fact, when we think about death, it's a form of living, isn't it? You live and you have the luxury to think about death. That's how full of life we are. Well, obviously that is if you don't obsess over the topic. Then you would be in denial that you inadvertently asserted life in your thinking about death. When there is a haunting meaningless in life, think about the meaninglessness of that meaninglessness. Like, who really cares? Even if you die on some random old sidewalk, if you lived long, if you understood yourself, which is easier than you think, then you would embrace the chaotic, unexpected end of your life. Laugh because it happened, don't cry because it ended and all that, you know? The universe is indifferent, but that doesn't mean you have to be indifferent to yourself. If you love yourself, you would love your death. And I don't see how it's hard to love yourself. And that's my bias as someone living a privileged middle-class life. If I was in a worse situation, I would have a completely different perspective, obviously. But I'm not. And I have the option, the luxury, to read and watch all the philosophy I want. And if you're watching this video, you can probably do the same. So you can probably embrace the meaninglessness of your life and death as well. Otherwise, if you're a Nazi, then you can't ever love your death because you're inherently alienated from yourself by your political stance.
Or so the Germans would have us believe.
In general, however, I think it's very much possible to embrace this meaninglessness, even if you live under capitalism. Well, okay, I admit that's a less defendable position, and it will require an entire video essay of its own to prove. Foreshadowing is a concept used in much of media. Thought I would mention that, unrelated. Foreshadowing, I think it's quite obvious that a theoretical person would embrace absurdity. Sisyphus, if he wasn't immortal, would love pushing up that boulder. There isn't anything profound to say in the myth of Sisyphus, really. I'm simply stating a fact in the previous few paragraphs that I was talking about death. I wasn't emotionally moving, I wasn't making art even. I was doing cold hard logic. Talking about hypothetical death isn't moving, usually. Because we aren't a hypothetical person in a vacuum completely disconnected from society. We are real. I know, it's crazy. Your lives are so much more than some stupid myth some wrinkly Greeks came up with while they were high on shrooms and hitting that weed, snorting line after line of pure cocaine in their degenerate temples. When I see people complain about the meaninglessness of it all, I'm like, dude, no, please. It's not meaninglessness, okay? Stop trying to blame this thing called meaninglessness. It's alienation from the self. You aren't frustrated with life, you're frustrated with capitalism. The thing that prevents you from living a full life. My interpretation of Hopper's paintings is from a Marxist perspective. To me, he depicted life and death under capitalism. So too did the show Beef. The show didn't depict human nature, it depicted human nature under capitalism. Imagine if Danny wasn't poor, if Isaac didn't get locked up and get involved in gang violence, if Amy wasn't required to be superficial to make her money and keep her status, If the disparity between the rich and poor weren't so large, if Danny had the option to not worry about his house burning down because he can afford to rebuild it, if mental health, nay, if human beings were prioritized over work and money, would we be so alienated as they are in the show? I don't think so. And that's why I'm going to ask the question today: what if death as something fulfilling isn't achievable? Can't just assume that we can all die. We can't assume that we have lived in the first place in order to die. Of course, I know why I live, but why assume that you lived in the first place? I think, therefore I am. Both fucking shit. I think, therefore I am. Who the fuck cares that you think? We all think. And yet, do we ever feel like we are? Why think when you need to work a 9 to 5? Why think when you're a minority being shot and dehumanized? The statement then must be, I don't think. I have never thought, therefore I won't ever be. I don't think, therefore I'm not. I'm too poor to afford this thing called thinking. Ever thought about that, Descartes? You rich fucking dickhead. Peasants work in the fields, or you theorize about existence of the mind separate from the body. Nobody fucking cares that we exist, Descartes. Okay? Nobody fucking cares that you had a dumb, stupid, stinky revelation while you were high on Why did I write this? Nobody cares that you had a stupid, dumb, stinky revelation while you were high on meth, tobacco, and whatever else you smoke in your junkie castle. We exist, but do we live? Do we have the luxury of death? Is there hope in capitalism? Hello, this is the preface to my magnum opus. I just want to say, the depiction of Asian American life in beef is way too accurate. I mean, I can't quite easily recognize my father in Danny. Alienated, hardworking, trying to meet expectations. Terrible, just absolutely terrible. A true tragedy of the modern age immigrants are. Yeah, that's about it.